Helmets on for safety. Welcome back to Random, and today I'm back at Hill Aerospace Museum to talk about this aircraft, the P-38 Lightning from Lockheed. The museum was, of course, in the middle of restoring a couple of different aircraft, chief among which is the B-29 back here. But that's a video for another time. And speaking of another time, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and if you enjoy cold beverages and groovy tunes, check out Beer and Song of the Day. The link to their channel will be in the description down below. Now, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning started its production run in the 1930s. That's right, a couple of years before the World War II kicked off in Europe and again in the Pacific theaters. What Lockheed did was they won a contract for a new aircraft to be designed as a pursuit aircraft. It had to have 1,000 horsepower at sea level, had to be able to accelerate to 400 knots, had to maneuver, had to engage targets, had to deliver bombs on target, and so on and so forth, and basically anything else you would want to do with an aircraft like this. Now, it's powered by twin Allison V1710 aircraft engines. Okay, now each of these are naturally aspirated, produce 1,000 horsepower, which was part of the contract requirement. They needed an engine capable of producing that kind of power, and Allison provided that. Now, I say naturally aspirated at sea level. That's going to be important here shortly. Its maximum speed was 414 miles an hour at sea level. Its combat range was 1,300 miles before it needed fuel. Now, this aircraft could be equipped with drop tanks along its center line and along its wings on different hard points. That was to give it a range of approximately 3,000 miles before it needed to land for fuel. Now, let's see here. It was armed, some variants were, with a 20mm Hispaniola cannon with 150 rounds of munitions, and 4 50 caliber BMG machine guns, or 2 50 cals and 2 Browning 30 calibers, which you can see up here. This aircraft appears to be armed with 4 50 cals and 1 20mm. So this particular aircraft was packing quite a punch. Now, what you see right here is the actual Allison. Now, this right here is the centrifugal supercharger that was bolted to the crank. Okay, so as the engine spun, like with every other supercharger, the crank is what drives the supercharger. Okay, so that's where it gets its compression. This engine right here is what we call forced induction. The earlier variants of the P-38 were equipped with Allisons that did not have superchargers, so they only produced 1,000 horsepower, naturally aspirated. Now, this engine could have produced upwards of 1,200 horsepower at sea level. Now, when you get up to altitudes, say 24,000 feet, which is where this aircraft saw a lot of its use, particularly later in the war, that 1,200 horsepower could easily drop to 800 horsepower. Now, why that was is because, unfortunately, the superchargers Allison had at the time weren't necessarily all that efficient in compressing air. And it wasn't until after the Lend-Lease Act was signed that the US got a hold of the Merlin II from Rolls-Royce that we had a chance to get a look at a better supercharger design and make more efficient power at higher altitudes, which is what that supercharger did for the Merlin. So after Allison got a newer supercharger, the engines were able to produce more power at higher altitudes, but they still had significant drop off. Okay, so even though this engine was producing 1,200 horsepower at sea level, at altitude, it was only producing 800, right? So they had to sit back and think and say, okay, how can we make a forced induction engine like this more efficient at altitude? And the answer was actually turbo compounding. Now, it's not turbocharging like it would be for, say, a Nissan GTR engine, where the exhaust gases turn the turbine, that turns the compressor, and that forces air into the engine so the engine can breathe more efficiently. What a turbo compounder does is it takes the expanding gases from the exhaust It turns a turbine. That turbine turns a shaft that is then connected to the crankshaft of the engine, thereby adding rotational energy back into the system and allowing the engine to produce more power more efficiently. And you can actually see where that would have connected with a spline shaft right there. So again, the turbo compounder would take rotational energy from the turbine being pushed by the exhaust gases of the engine and apply it back into the engine itself and allow it to rotate more freely with less drag and more efficiency. So an engine that produced 1,600 horsepower at sea level with the turbo compounder would actually produce closer to 1,200 horsepower at its maximum altitude. That extra power gave the aircraft much more versatility, much more speed, much more efficiency at those higher altitudes, so the pilots keep up with the bombers and adequately protect them from enemy fighters coming to shoot them down. Now, this aircraft was used worldwide, okay? So the Pacific theater, the European theater, and America wasn't the only one to use the P-38. The Free French Air Corps used it. Where did I leave off? Okay, so the US was not the only one to use the P-38s. It was used worldwide. A bunch of different air forces, the Free French Air Force, the Chinese Air Forces in some instances used these in the Pacific as well. And they saw quite extensive use in Europe too, particularly early in the war. The socialist Germans, sorry, the Nazis, it's so easy to get those two confused when they're the same thing. They absolutely hated the P-38, particularly at the lower altitudes, because it was just so much faster. It was so much more maneuverable than anything that they were used to fighting against. So Hitler himself actually called the P-38s the fork-tailed devils, because they absolutely wrecked house, along with the Mosquito built by de Havilland, which that's a whole different story done by the Rotund EMF dude. He has an episode on YouTube. You should check that out too. But yeah, the P-38 Lightning, fantastic aircraft. Now, what's interesting about the weapons on this aircraft is that they actually were synced to about 500 yards out, and since they were mounted on the nose instead of the wings, all of the ammunition focused in on a single point, where aircraft like the P-51, the P-40s, and the Spitfires had their guns in the wings. They had to be synchronized at different distances to engage a particular target. This didn't have to do that because all the guns were on the nose. Pretty neat stuff. Now, of course, one famous P-38 is Glacier Girl, and she was unfortunately wrecked on delivery to the European theater during the war. And of course, over time, she was lost. But a few years ago, she was found in the ice, and they dug her out and rebuilt her and brought her back to flying condition. And from what I'm told, she is still flight worthy. But this is some time ago, so I have to double check if my editor doesn't put some snide comment down below. But that's pretty much it for today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if my editor does his job right, which he usually doesn't, this should be available on YouTube shortly. And as always, folks, keep it random.